Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha with Ice Cream Fitness here. Today I want to talk to you guys about another channel, one I've never mentioned before, but it is by a much older gentleman. And I don't agree with everything that he says, but I do think that due to his sheer amount of experience, you can glean some pearls of wisdom out of a lot of what he says. And I saw one of his videos today. That is one of those videos, and I just want to share it with you guys. And that gentleman is known as Leroy Colbert. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot first. And then there's going to be people who see that and think that I'm trying to be a bodybuilder, or that I'm a bodybuilder because of my bicep shot signature. And just letting anyone who's some of Leroy's fans who saw this name in the title, I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't really give a fuck about getting on a stage. I care about being strong. I care about being powerful. I care about winning powerlifting meets. Now, the video in question, I'm going to link Leroy's video right here, and I'm going to link it down below. Now, Leroy and I are definitely going to disagree on the steroids, because you guys know me, I think athletes should be on drugs. Not necessarily guys who just want bigger biceps for the beach. Those guys are pretty much a waste of steroids. They're wasting good drugs that athletes need to compete in their sports. But I don't believe in the concept of natural athletes at all. So I'm sure we'll disagree on that. But when it comes to training, I think you guys need to take a bit of what Leroy Colbert is saying seriously here. And the reason for it is that the guys from his era, before we had all these drugs available, and even then, the only drugs that were available in his era in the United States to bodybuilders was Dianabol. Now, of course, Leroy does claim that he didn't use it because it wasn't available. I don't know whether I believe him or not on that, but I'll take his word for it. Considering that from what I've heard of his training and his nutrition, it seems pretty optimal to me for a natural lifter trying to build muscle. It's actually much better than most natural bodybuilders train today. And he seems to have good genetics, so alright, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But his training and what he points out in the video is that back then they learned by trial and error. And this stuff was well understood. When people had tried body part splits and splitting their body up before drugs were introduced, those guys couldn't get big enough, fast enough to win bodybuilding shows or to compete. They could not compete in the top tiers of bodybuilding. So all the best guys use full body because you will simply grow faster on a proper full body program the way they all did it. For the vast majority of people, you're going to make faster gains in muscle mass doing that type of training if there are no drugs in your system. And he advocates in the video of training full body, doing at least 3 sets. He says you probably can't get away with 10 sets, as some people can, some people can't. I agree with that. Some people can do it due to their workload tolerance. Others are going to flounder with that. But yeah, even my novice program I wrote for you guys is 5 sets. 3 times a week on non-consecutive days. And that's pretty much the same type of advice he's given people. Not to do very high reps, to focus on a moderate workload, relatively heavy weight, not doing super high reps. Keeping the number of lifts you do relatively low, that you only need a couple of lifts per body part, so that your body focuses upon training the motor skills and the neural pathways involved with that lift. And the faster you progress on those just couple of lifts that you're doing, the faster your gains are going to be. But he believes in training once every 48 hours, training full body, and his results were pretty impressive. And most of the guys who trained that way in his era have better physiques than most guys that you know right now who use a little bit of steroids, before steroids were even around. And I think that's in large part simply due to the fact that their training was superior to the splits that people are doing who are not on very large amounts of drugs. In order to really make a split program work optimally, you do need a fairly large amount of drugs, not just a little bit. So this is a guy who did it. He went through it himself. He knew all of the top guys back in his day. He knew how they trained. He experimented with his own training and had one of the most impressive physiques of his era, and that is how he trained And he is telling you the same thing that I'm telling you, and the same thing that I'm telling you based upon the scientific research we have today, showing that this type of training is going to be superior for most people who aren't on drugs. So you've got old guys like him with all the experience in the world telling you this, and then you have science guys like me telling you the same thing today. So why people don't get it, I just don't know. Because you have people on both ends of the spectrum telling you this. And I simply don't understand why at this point, when you have guys like Leroy coming from back then with all of those decades and decades of experience, are agreeing with all the modern science guys, and we're saying the exact same thing, that our scientific evidence is saying this stuff that they figured out decades ago is actually right. And they actually had it right back then, and people have pretty much screwed it up after that. Why people don't get that, and why they don't seem to make that connection between the two, is just beyond me. But go check it out. And like I said, I don't always agree with everything that Mr. Colbert says, but I do agree with a fair amount of it. And I think this particular video is one of those to where I probably agree with about 90% of what he said in that video. And all of my understanding of sports physiology and exercise science actually agrees with what he says in that video. He has it pretty accurate, and he's actually giving it to you from his real world experience. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you next time.